What do you ask someone much more intelligent than you?
Have you ever been in a fight?
And much more erudite?
You haven't teamed up with Leonard Arrigen's ghost to rewrite church history?
What do you ask a guy who has spent a lifetime with one foot in the highest echelons of academia and the other foot? I mean, the guy's a stake patriarch.
So if I understand you correctly, you said that you'd kind of fallen into this agnosticism before your mission.
Yeah.
And you left while being agnostic?
I tried to tell the stake president when he interviewed. I didn't believe. He said, "Oh, you go on a mission."
Okay, so here's my interest with Richard Bushman. One of the classical paradigms we've seen in the world is, at least in the modern world, is this supposed friction between like faith and belief and then like science and facts.
I'll tell you what I think is the real story on this, about how I lost my testimony.
There's been this, what I hope and generally perceive as a false paradigm, that you're stupid if you believe, right?
I don't use the word know. I don't say I know the gospel is true. Know implies I have evidence that will convince you.
That's kind of been what the academics have said. And there's a lot of people of faith that want to discredit and distrust academia for that. And what's so interesting about Richard Bushman is he has been to the top floor of both these institutions. He's the author of the premier biographies, like academically, historically sound and phenomenal biographies on Joseph Smith. He just released a book on the Golden Plates. He's literally the stake patriarch in Manhattan, which is the closest thing we literally have to a shaman in the modern world. I wonder, how does he balance that? And I'm also wondering what golden nuggets of wisdom he's gleaned by being in both fields simultaneously.
It's a huge question.
That's all we do here. It's WardRadio, man.
Well, it's a central and key question to my whole life purpose, because I really have been deeply shaped by two institutions.
That's really my only question for him. That's it. I'm showing up for one question, and then I'm just winging it after that. I'm humble enough to admit that I may not be the most intellectually stimulating conversation he's ever had, so at least hopefully I'll sell him some books, right? True or not true? Looks like a younger version of Gary Oldman. Yeah. Dude, did you know that the ballpoint pen is like one of the single greatest marvels of modern engineering history? The captain literally just said that they accidentally snapped part of the nose gear when they were backing up. Hey, we're fine. We're fine. This is the most over-engineered thing on the planet. Money! Shout out Richard Bushman. I have to get some of you too, bro. I love that we're not in Utah, so I can wear my hat and nobody will recognize us.
All right, we'll put up a counter of how many people recognize Cardin on this trip.
Hotel information, 235 West 46th Street. 235 West 46th
I don't know anybody that prints out their hotel information.
We are 7 minutes away, 0.3 miles. So I am Luke Hansen. I have a new moniker of Cool-Headed Luke, and I'm the editor at WardRadio News, and I guess I'm the producer's producer. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
Yes.
call you the producer of the producer.
Producer of the producer. I helped get this thing set up, so I earned a trip out here.
Reluctant to say that this is my favorite part of New York because, you know, only a Sith speaks in absolutes, but I'm pretty sure that this is my favorite part of New York. So we made it here to the Upper West Side, all in one piece. We're about to ring the doorbell on Richard Bushman's apartment here. and hopefully have a really good interview with him. I got my book here, Joseph Smith's Gold Plates, his recent publication. You guys may know him as the author of Rough Stone Rolling, probably the premier biography of Joseph Smith in the past 50 years. And I gotta tell you, I'm really excited. Richard Bushman is probably the most well-decorated academic I would say met, but I haven't met him yet, but I'm about to meet in my life. I was reading in the back page of this book. He's received the Governor Morris Professor Emeritus of History at Columbia University. He's received fellowships from the American Council of Learned Societies, the Charles Warren Center, the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is a really, really, really accomplished guy and a great book. So I look forward to talking to him. Hey, is this Bushman Fan Club? Money. Old school, man. At least it's not the one we have to close it. Hey, we got the welcoming crew already. Hi, pleasure to meet you. I'm Cardinellis. How are you doing? Yeah. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our WardRadio interview with Richard Bushman. To a certain extent, I don't feel like I have to introduce you because your reputation does precede itself. However, I read the back sleeve of your most recent book, Joseph Smith's Gold Plates, which I am devouring and love. And you're a very well-decorated academic. I mean, I knew you'd won a lot of awards, but this is impressive. Governor Morris Professor Emeritus of History at Columbia University. You obviously wrote Rough Stone Rolling. You received fellowships from the American Council of Learned Societies, the Guggenheim Foundation, National Endowment for the Humanities. This is pretty awesome. When you started out, you know that you'd end up this way?
Had no idea.
That's awesome. So, I've been thinking a lot about this interview with you. I first encountered you in 2007 as a door-to-door salesman when I read Rough Stone Rolling. And both academically and faithfully, it was a very profound experience for me reading that book. I loved it. I devoured it. And I would say it actually augmented my testimony, though you're very clear in Rough Stone Rolling that that's not the purpose, that you're doing your best to be academically sound and unbiased. The contextualization of Joseph Smith and the understanding I got from that book very much deepened my connection with him and the time period in Mormon history. I've been very excited to come here, and talk to you. Before we dive into the book, both old ones and recent, I'd like to just get to know you a little bit better. When I told people I was coming to interview Richard Bushman, a lot of people said, well, who is he? And the elevator pitch I've been giving is he's basically the biggest Mormon academic of the past 50 years. Do you think that's a fair elevator pitch?
That's a pretty heavy load to carry. I think that'd be hard to decide. We've got some really outstanding academics at Yale, at Johns Hopkins, and other places around the country. I got a lot of notoriety because of the biography coming out right when it was needed, and a lot of people read it, and so I think I'm as well known as most historians in the church these days.
So where did this all begin? I mean, you're 93 years old. That is, if we do the math, what year were you born?
31.
I mean, you were a teenager when World War II started. You remember Technicolor. Like, what's your earliest memory?
Well, my earliest memory is when I first walked. If you want to go back that far, when I was just a little fella.
My father said his earliest memory was the assassination of JFK. He was born in 1960, and he remembers at 4 years old, people weeping in the streets, and it obviously was a very jarring experience nationally. So he said that always stuck out in his mind.
as his earliest memory. And I just think, man, you were there when The Wizard of Oz came out. You know, you were 8 years old.
Don't rub it in. Just
The reason why I contemplate that is I just think it's almost like a different Mormonism you remember. So much has happened since the 1930s, and you've been here to see it all. Is there anything that pops out in your mind after having just lived so long and seen so much and been a member your entire life, where you think, wow, that was a great improvement, or, oh man, I kind of miss how we used to do it?
Mm-hmm. Well, there have been some significant changes. One, obviously, for everyone is the very intense emphasis on Christ as the center of our religion. We were in the 30s sort of in competition with other denominations, so we were always trying to show the superiority of our ways. So proving that Joseph Smith was a prophet, the Book of Mormon was true, was central to what we did. Now we are really teaching Christ. That's our first missionary presentation of the faith is Christ. And I think that's wonderful.
Did you always know you wanted to be an academic?
No. When I first thought of myself as a career, I thought of science. One time when I was in high school, riding along on the bus with my father, I said, what should I be when I grow up? And he suggested electronics. You know, radio was a big thing then, and electronics seemed like a real future. So I went to college. I first majored in physics.
Oh, okay.
Was a thoroughgoing physics major for the first semester, but I found I didn't really like laboratories or experimentation, so I migrated to math. And then I migrated to history and science, which at Harvard in those days was a booming field. And then when I got back from my mission, I really decided I'd just do history. So it was really my junior year before I settled on history as a subject.
Where'd you serve?
In New England.
Okay.
I went to church in Cambridge on Brattle Street. There was in a big mansion where the church met. And right next door to it was another big mansion, part of the Longfellow estate, and that was the mission headquarters. And we had firesides, we did all sorts of activities in the mission headquarters. And I knew the mission president very well. And then I was called from being a student in one building to being a missionary right next door and serving in New England. And the mission president's wife, through my whole mission, never called me Elder Bushman. She called me Dick, which is what I went by
Really?
those days. So it was a very strange kind of mission.
Wow. So you served in New England now. I mean, you live in New York City. It seems like the majority of your life you've kind of been out of the Western United States, Utah-centric fray. You're one of us, like the diasporic Mormons.
That's right.
That's interesting. Coming here, I kind of actually only had one question. Luke is very prepared and gave me about 30 questions. But the one that I really wanted to start out with, obviously, is I want to get to know you a little bit better, find out a little bit more about your story. But what really interested me about you is you're a very unique person in the sense that you really do stand with one foot in two institutions. Traditionally, academia and religion is perceived as being at odds with one another, okay? Yet here you are, having received the Guggenheim Award, emeritus professorships from Ivy League schools. You've written all of these wonderfully respected biographies on Joseph Smith and so on and so forth. Yet, from what I understand, you're the patriarch in your stake, which, if anybody who is familiar with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints knows that that's about the closest equivalent that we have to a shaman, our oracle at Delphi. That's kind of one of the highest echelons of modern spirituality, I would say, that could be achieved. So you are somebody very uniquely equipped, it seems, from my view, to talk about, frankly, epistemology, how we know things, how we understand truths, and how, with both feet in each one of these institutions and at the highest echelons of those institutions, how they interact and how they inform each other. So being as accomplished as you are in both spirituality and academia, do you feel that they're at odds with each other, that it's a battlefield in your mind, or how have you balanced those two? Mm-hmm. Because so many people say, like, you're stupid if you believe on this side over here. And then this one over here seems very anti-elitist, they always seem at odds with each other. How do you balance that?
Well, it's a central and key question to my whole life purpose and my identity, because I really have been, to be very candid, deeply shaped by two institutions, the church, as we know it, and Harvard. Mm-hmm. When I arrived there in 1949, I was more at home than I'd ever been in my life. I loved Harvard.
Okay.
So the culture of it, I was sort of a booky character, and books meant something. Thought meant something, and so that was an atmosphere I felt very much at home with. But it wasn't quite obvious that I fit in. I was in history and science, as I say, and I had a tutor in my sophomore year, a man named I.B. Cohn, a very eminent character, scholar, had just founded the history and science program. I was one of the first students in it. And we got to know each other pretty well. I'd go in and see him every couple of weeks, and we'd talk about a book. And one time he said to me, Dick, people around here think Mormonism is garbage. Mm. And I think what he was doing was in sort of a avuncular way, trying to bring me along, help me mature out of my naive childhood beliefs into a larger, more cosmopolitan view of the world. And of course, I was a little shocked. I don't remember being smitten, but I'd never forgotten the incident, because it was sort of an insult not just to my beliefs and my religion, but to my family, my friends, this whole society I knew. He was dismissing them. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't feel like I could take that. But what happened in that moment, in those years, and I will say, by the time I went on the mission, I'd become agnostic. I no longer believed in God. I didn't think you could prove God. So it had some kind of an impact along with all the other stuff I was reading. But since that time, I think what has been my life purpose is to make Mormonism intelligible to people of all points of view, and perhaps a little attractive. It wasn't that I thought I could persuade them, because I don't think you can argue and prove religion, just like you can't disprove religion by argument. But I wanted to be respectable as a believing Latter-day Saint in that academic society. And everything I've done in the church vein has been to achieve that goal.
Yes. What is the number one thing that you feel has made it more respectable, more intelligible? Because I think I'm a smart guy. I mean, graduated from college. I don't feel I'm bouncing around too badly in life, you know. But I do worry if I weren't raised in the church with this amazing blessing that it's been in my life. I understand my own pride and arrogance. I could totally see myself being a basic bro, too smart for God. You're stupid if you believe. Read a couple of Richard Dawkins and whoever that other guy was, you know what I'm saying, book, and then kind of feel like I'm too smart for this, okay? And then miss out on the blessings that it has given me. It's introduced me to my wife, who is amazing, helped me raise my two children, who are just beautiful. I've served a mission for the church and had experiences there. I've discovered a deeper and a profound spirituality that I don't feel I would get if left to my own vices, right? And we do live in a very secularized academic world. What has been your best tool in making Mormonism more intelligible to those that might previously consider themselves disbelievers, or like you when you were agnostic? What has been the most effective thing that's helped you accomplish that goal?
You could call it humility. You could call it perspective. I don't know what the word for it is. But what troubles me about those new atheists when they came along, that collection of them for a while, is they seemed shallow to me. They were clever, and I would say even smarty. They're kind of arrogant. They knew all, you know. They were just so sure of themselves, scornful of anyone who believed. And those people can make an impact, but they're not very deep. They didn't really seem to deal with the real struggles of life, which is, how do you handle suffering? How do you find your place in the world, the meaning of the world? Does the world have any meaning at all? How do you answer your yearnings to be a good person? So they didn't perform what religion is meant to do, because they were so busy trying to dispel it as a sort of a simplified view of the world. So I think it was my realization that I needed religion. It's a deep human need. Just look at human history. There's a religion everywhere. It comes right out of evolution, or whatever you want to call it. This need to understand, how do we make sense of the sky, of horror, of disappointment. And it was that realization that I needed religion. I needed all the things that religion does for us.
So you mentioned, would you say that's what pulled you out of your agnosticism that you previously mentioned? Was just recognizing, I actually need this?
Yeah, and then I began to formulate arguments, and that I could respond to.
So if I understand you correctly, you said that you'd kind of fallen into this agnosticism before your mission.
Yeah.
And you left while being agnostic?
I tried to tell the stake president when he interviewed. I didn't believe. He said, "Oh, you go on a mission. It'll take care of things."
Okay.
I came back to Cambridge and was interviewed by President Mon, and he said, "Do you have a testimony of the gospel?" And I said, "No." And he just handed me a book. He said, "I'd like you to read this book and tell me what you think of it."
Okay.
And put me on the train to Halifax, Nova Scotia, carrying the Book of Mormon in my hand. And I read that book and thought about it, and more I began to realize it was true. Within 3 months, when he came up for a testimony, to meet with the missionaries, I was asked to bear my testimony. I said, I know the book is right. And I'll tell you what I think is the real story on this.
Okay.
This is a story I've told for many years about how I lost my testimony and how I regained it. But I think the real story is, I hadn't lost my testimony. If I had lost my testimony, would I have gone on a mission to teach the gospel?
Yeah.
You know,
Well, no, you wouldn't have, but
I wouldn't have gone
yeah.
on a mission. I mean, if I really was, I think my real problem was that I couldn't explain why I had a testimony. I was nonplussed as I sat around the dinner table at Harvard talking to my fellow students about my beliefs. I couldn't find a way to explain them that made sense to them. I didn't have to persuade them. I just had to be respectable if someone had reasons for what he believed. So I think it just took me a while to sort of think through ways of describing what Mormonism meant to me that finally brought me around.
Wow. So was there an individual inciting incident where you feel you went from being agnostic to all of a sudden realizing, oh wait, no, I do have a testimony, like one of the classic prayer stories? Or is it something similar to like mine, where it was so gradual over time that finally once you'd gotten there, you realized you were there?
I think in the missions field, I realized I could be what I wanted to be if I presented myself as a believer. And I did believe. I could bear testimony. But the enlargement and enrichment and the strengthening of this has really occurred across my whole life. I still devote thought to how can I explain what I believe. Whenever there's a problem come up, I have to find some way of explaining it and defending the truth and the goodness. I have what I call an epistemology of goodness.
Okay.
How do we decide something is truly good, and how do we adhere to it? That has been sort of one of the quests of my life.
Was there anything in particular that you felt you could not explain, where maybe you emotionally believed in it, but couldn't articulate why, that upon learning how to articulate it, you know, something clicked? Was there anything in particular that you wrestled with, or was it all just this general malaise of spirituality?
Well, it's step by step, finding one problem and finding a way around that, and then another. You know, my mind's always sort of looking for, so it's piecemeal.
Yeah.
I'm going that way. And I'll tell you one story that gives an example of what I think you're asking about. Sometime in my mid-years, I was at a conference at the College of William and Mary, where there's an Institute of Early American History and Culture, which is the sort of the mothership of all early American historians. And the editor of the William and Mary Quarterly was a guy named Mike McGiffert. And his grandfather had been a very eminent theologian.
Okay.
At Riverside Church, just up here, there's a door that has his grandfather's name carved in stone above it.
Is that the really beautiful,
The beautiful,
kind of?
yeah,
Just, okay.
yeah, 2 blocks away. And Mike had always struggled with his belief. He was a Unitarian in name, but never was sure. And one night, after closing dinner of one of our conferences, he was driving me home, and he stopped the car, and he said, Richard, how is it you can possibly believe?
Wow, okay.
The kind of questions you have here, because this was an existential question for him. And I gave some answers, some things I'd generated over the years, fell flat with him. Finally, I said, well, I'll tell you this. I'm a bishop in one of our wards, and people come to me with problems are just too big for me. Personal, deep problems in their families, in their lives, in their relationships with the world. And he said, I just could not do that job if I couldn't call upon God to help me find the right words. That satisfied him. He says, well, that makes sense. So what he was interested in was functioning ideas of God. How does God actually work in your life? What does it do? Not just some abstraction about there has to be a God out there, but how is it interwoven with your day-to-day work? So that's been a very important experience for me. That was, and it's a principle I think is true. I think we bear our testimony. We shouldn't just say, I know because I had an experience. We should say, it helped me with my 10-year-old daughter who's filled with fear when she goes to bed at night, or it helps me teach my primary class. I think we need to talk about how it works. So what it amounts to is pragmatism is my principle of truth, what works.
Okay, so I love how you emphatically said, okay, I know. And knowledge, obviously, know is part of the root word of knowledge, right? We know many academic truths, especially scientific ones. I was a physics major too, physics major, fist bump right there. When I started at BYU, and one of the fun and fascinating things about physics, especially Newtonian mechanics, mathematics, calculus, is these are naturalistically observed phenomenon that we can repeat through the scientific method and say that we know things because every single time we drop a rock, it's 9.82 meters per second acceleration and so on and so forth. And it's very fun operating in those circles because it's very comfortable because you're able to verify these things. Yet here you are as also a stake patriarch, who is dictating the lineage of somebody that you may have only known briefly for a short period of time, relying upon the Spirit for that knowledge. Yet it almost seems like it's the same word, but from two different avenues, right? So are you as confident in your spiritual knowledge, like in your patriarchal blessings, as you are in your history? Do you see flaws in either process? Do you view both as knowledge? Like, how does a guy that knows exactly what it's like to be able to say, I know this is true from a Harvard professor standpoint? Also, with the same confidence, do you say, okay, I know this is true to, for example, your patriarchal blessings or your spiritual phenomena in your life? Do you feel those are confidently you place them in the same level?
No.
Okay.
I don't use the word no. I may have with you, it slipped out because we're brothers, but I don't say I know the gospel is true. And the reason I don't is in the circles, for the very thing you said, in the circles I work in, no implies I have evidence that will convince you. I don't have evidence that will convince someone else. I have evidence that will convince me. So I use more modest words like, I believe the gospel is true, or I just state the facts of it. Joseph Smith did this or that. But the no language doesn't work for me.
So for you, no is reserved to the verifiable and easily explained.
Right.
And I think that humility is laudable. At the same time, I think, man, if we could just get humanity a little more spiritual so that we're firing on, all 5 of the epistemological cylinders instead of just the one, the naturally verifiable, then
right.
Then I think we could more confidently say no in both. But I guess that's why we're the salt of the earth, and we have to be the salt that's stuck in the plate of food in order to increase its savor. And maybe that's our calling as Christians. Really quick, I'm just going to go to your book here. I'd written down a couple of questions in the back. You mentioned you. Actually, let me pause here for a second. How would I say this? I guess my last question, kind of in this vein of epistemology, is you mentioned that you thought being agnostic before your mission was a misnomer. That it wasn't that you had lost your testimony, you just had kind of lost faith in your testimony because you couldn't explain it very well, if I want to steelman your position. Okay. So how do you, now as a patriarch, explain to the non-Mormon cardinalists, the non-Mormon academic, how do you make the shamanism of a patriarchal blessing, how do you make that intelligible to your fellow academics, to your fellow just generally intelligent laymen? How would you convert that into their language?
It's not very hard. I simply describe what happens.
Okay.
I say, I've never had to do this, but this is what I would do if I were asked. I'd say, put my hands on their head. I've tried very hard to prepare myself spiritually, and I simply speak the words that come to me. I search my mind and hope and pray they will be words that will be a blessing to this person, that they'll be able to read them all their lives and gain strength from them and see their depth and meaning. But I can't say I'm reading a script in heaven. All I can say is what happens. I try very hard to be ready spiritually, and then I just speak the words that come to me.
Okay, and the last question in this vein of being both an academic and a spiritual person is, if the academic version of you were president of the United Academic States of America and could dictate to your fellow academics something they could learn from your spirituality, what would it be? And then conversely, what would you like to see all spiritual people, all of your fellow members of the church, really learn from your time amongst the academics and the people at Harvard, and so on and so forth? What are the biggest lessons both of these camps you think could learn from each other?
It's a huge question.
That's all we do here. It's WardRadio, man.
Well, what I would say to academics is that they need to consider the full range of human emotions and human needs. That you don't want to just talk about the things that are apparently true to us in our Enlightenment perspective. To see only the world as modernism and Enlightenment sees it, says that's the only truth. There's a much broader range of human experience, and we have to be responsive to that. We have to respect people who have religious beliefs. That is true and vital for them, and we need to treat it with true and vital. It's actually a form of colonialism for us to impose our Enlightenment values on the world and say Mormonism is foolish, the Catholics are all off, Buddhism, poo-poo. Those are human experiences, and we need to respect them as for what they are and honor them.
Okay, I see Luke in the corner of my eye just totally nodding. So looks like these guys are smelling what you're stepping in.
The good guys are all in
yeah, awesome.
favor of this.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about your book now. Joseph Smith's Gold Plates. What was the impetus for this? I heard that with Rough Stone Rolling, that you actually wanted to finish a book on farming, and then you weren't actually going to do the biography of Joseph Smith, but then somebody asked you, and you're like, oh, what the heck, I'll finish it and I'll do it. And that ended up kind of being the seminal work that most people know you by, right? Is there a similar story with this, or is this kind of a little bit more run-of-the-mill?
Well, I had the same competition. I still was working on a book on farming, and which I finally published in 2018, many years after starting it. So I did decide to do that first and then finish this up later.
Okay, so what was the impetus for this? What made you say, okay, I want to write a book specifically on the gold plates?
Whim. I have no idea. There was no sort of intellectual need or some problem that had to be settled. And it wasn't that I thought the gold plates was leverage. We get those witnesses in there.
Yeah.
We're really going to prove to people that there was mysterious divine powers at work. I just thought they're a beautiful emblem. This ancient book, gold, with inscriptions on these hammered plates, telling the history of a civilization, 1,000-year history of this civilization that ultimately destroyed itself through its pride and wickedness. I think that's just lovely. So I wanted to say, how do people deal with that? How has it been accepted or used? So I saw the book really as a study, an American culture study. It wasn't religious in the sense of it's the story of Mormonism. It's how do all sorts of people deal with something that sort of comes into play and requires attention because so many people believe in it. It's not just a flimsy thing that's talked about and then dropped. It's sort of somewhere near the foundation of this Mormon faith. So I thought it'd just be fun to do.
That is awesome. I absolutely love that origin story. So while reading your book here, I underlined a couple of things. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask you some odd questions that I came across from your book. First and foremost was, let's talk a little bit about the interpreters. You'd presented me with some new facts that I hadn't known before, and I want to make sure that I'm representing this correctly. That apparently in the first pass at translation, sometime in 1827-ish, presumably, they were called the Urim and the Thummim, and the traditional story that we all hear in primary and so on and so forth went forth, and they translated. But before he really understood his role as translator, Smith had experienced the interpreters. It was enthusiastic about being able to see lots of things. Like, I think the actual quote, if I look it up right here, it's on page 24, was he said, these are wonderful, I can see anything. Exactly. Isn't it wonderful? I can see anything. So is there any documentation of what was that anything he could see? Did he ever illuminate, was he able to just look into and be show me Central Park in 1934 and then, be able to see 100 years in the future? Was there, in all of your research of this, did he ever elaborate as to what his experience with the interpreters before he began translation meant?
Nope. Answer is no.
No.
No. I think the significance of that statement, which Joseph Knight wrote down, who was a pretty good reporter, is that Joseph did have experience with seer stones he had discovered himself in finding lost objects. And they were fun and thrilling for him because he could see things. And then when he got the spectacles, the interpreters, they were even more glorious. So I think there's sort of a continuation. There's sort of a smooth curve between the seer stone he used and then this instrument he received with the plates.
So let's talk this seer stone. It's very interesting. I don't know if you realize this or not, but now we are embroiled in this miniature controversy that's a brew, shall we say, of whether or not Joseph Smith used a seer stone. And there's some very viciously divided camps, and us being a podcast that oftentimes deals in debunkings in church history, people oftentimes want to come to us with our opinions, right? And I've heard everything from Richard Bushman is in cahoots with Leonard Arrington to rewrite the history of the church, to he can that it was almost that this is unimpeachable and should not be questioned, and everything over here. There's such a wide and vast array of controversy that has surrounded Joseph Smith and these seer stones and whether or not he used them. Yet you brought up interestingly in the book that it seems like he was using the interpreters the first time in 1827, then the 116 pages are lost. And then in the second round in 1828, it looks like he actually used a seer stone more. So it's not that these are mutually exclusive, but it looks like, according to the historical evidence you've seen, that he actually used both. Is that a fair interpretation?
It is, but it's not uniquely mine. That's been sort of a standard interpretation for quite some time. But as you're implying, there's a great controversy now about the seer stones.
Yeah.
And two scholars, Jim Lucas and Jonathan Neville,
Yes.
are contesting that. They say it was the Urim and Thummim all along, by which they mean the stones that came with the plates that were set in the breastplate that he used. So the official church position is that he shifted to seer stones. That's over the last 15 years or so the church has come to that position, because there are some very strong descriptions of translation that show him using the seer stones. But Jonathan Neville and Jim Lucas feel like it was really, that is an erroneous interpretation of the evidence.
So what are the strengths and weaknesses of that position? Because it's such an odd little controversy.
It's an odd one, because it isn't Mormon versus non-Mormon believer. It's Mormons themselves are debating this issue. They're all believers. This strength of the Neville Lucas position is that in the history of telling the story of the plates, the word Urim and Thummim is used over and over again, heavily there. The weakness of it is that there are some pretty strong testimony from people who were on the scene, Emma Smith and David Whitmer and Martin Harris, who said he did use a seer stone as well. Okay. And they had to sort of discount and explain away strong sources. And that's always dangerous if you think you have to pay no heed to sources. So that's sort of the strength and weaknesses of that position. On the other hand, people who believe the seer stone simply accept these other views of their moving that David Whitmer and Martin Harris and Oliver Cowdery and Emma came up with.
Do you hear that, Jim Lucas? Do you hear that, Jonathan Neville? We're coming for you. No, I'm just kidding. So you haven't teamed up with Leonard Arrigen's ghost to rewrite church history? Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm teamed up with Leonard Arrigen's ghost.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. And then, gosh, we're coming up on our hour here. I got time for one more question with you. By the way, I love the length of your book. Rough Stone Rolling. That was a Bible. That was a tome. That took me, I think, 6 weeks of reading every day to get through.
Did you really get through it?
Oh yeah, no, I did.
Lots of people sort of tire at about 1840.
That's about I can see. No, I was a door-to-door salesman living off of Barham Boulevard in an apartment complex that was mostly corporate housing for executives, young professionals, and surprisingly, tons of child actors and their families for the studios, because Warner Brothers and Universal Studios and a lot of the major television production studios that have family sitcoms that need child actors are nearby, almost within walking distance. And so I had 3 friends in that apartment complex. One of my best LDS friends, who was an actor, I ended up meeting in that apartment complex as well. He was doing gigs locally. A couple of child actors from some really fun sitcoms, and all of them saw this giant book on the side of my bed, and we'd go out and we'd do door-to-door sales during the day. I would come home, maybe do some social activities with my friends at church or friends in the complex. And then every night when I went to bed, I'd try and read as much of the book as I can. And I think it literally took me 6 weeks. So I did indeed read every single page, but it was a lot more of a workout mentally to get through Rough Stone Rolling than this one. So I appreciate that. So anyway, the last question I had that I thought was really interesting was in the very beginning of the book, page 24, if I remember correctly, you'd said just right in the preface, okay, sorry, on the Roman numeral 4, you'd said a logical path for a Latter-day Saint growing up in the modern world, especially one who became a historian, would be to grow out of my childhood beliefs. And you alluded to your agnosticism, gaining your testimony back by making Mormonism more intelligible and so on and so forth. And then later on, you put a quote in here saying, again, Weber, dozens of scholars for the past 20 years had been arguing that enchantment has never been lost. It has persisted as an ingrained and felicitous feature of the human imagination, even among scientists. What do you feel that's what's kept you in it for so long? Because I mean, you're 93 now. You're at the top of your academic game. You've written 1 million books. And if you think about it, your testimony has basically stayed intact and strong for 70 years. You haven't fallen out of love with it, for lack of a better term, right? What has kept you going? What's been the thing that keeps it intact for you?
Well, I see two questions here. You're asking if it's enchantment, and then you're asking, what is it?
Exactly.
It's not enchantment. I will say this, that I love the idea of enchantment. I love the idea of magic, the idea that there are forces, inexplicable forces that can enter our lives and help us out in ways we can't explain. I think that's a very important view to give us courage, because life is very discouraging, sometimes seems absolutely bleak. And the thought that there are forces out there somewhere that I cannot explain that are going to help me. I think that's an important part of our religion to hold on to, because it gives us confidence that we can go on. But what keeps me going is what I think is one of the basics of religion, and that is redemption. I think what we really yearn for is to be better people than we are. I mean, to be worthy to be loved. And a lot of our efforts to be the greatest at this or greatest at that. It's just some way to say, you've got to respect me, you've got to love me. And not all people can make $1 billion and demand respect and love. So we all have that same deepest need. And Mormonism is provided for that. I mean, it involves the atonement of Christ, but it also means a life in a warm, absorbing, reinforcing community of people who love me. And then just simple prayer, that in times of despair you can go to God and say, give me courage, give me strength. When I was first appointed chair of Mormon Studies at Claremont Graduate University, I was taken to lunch by the dean of the School of Religion, and he just came at me. We just put our order in, and then he just turned to me and said, Richard, how can you possibly believe in Joseph Smith? Mm-hmm. Of course, he'd hired me as a scholar, so he was in fact asking, how can a scholar, rational person, believe in Joseph Smith with gold plates and the whole works? And my simple answer was, when I live the Mormon way, I'm the kind of man I want to be. That's what my religion means to me. Gives me hope. I can be more effective, more clear-headed, more compassionate.
Ah, it's beautiful. I absolutely love that. So, unfortunately our hour was up, but Richard Bushman, thank you so much. I have to say, when you go like that and you get real intense, I wouldn't want to mess with you. Be honest, have you ever been in a fight?
On the grade...
Has it ever come to fisticuffs? You know what I'm saying?
When I was in 5th grade.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
So did you win?
I actually did. There was a bully on the school ground.
You take my hole out of my shirt, then hit me like that.
Really?
And it finally, I'm not a fighter. I mean, that's not my style. Yeah. But this got to me, so I went after him. And it's the old story. We became good friends after that.
Oh, that's hilarious. You remember his name? Any shout outs? We got to say hi to...
No.
No? Okay.
No, I hope he lived a happy life.
Oh, that's perfect. That's awesome. All right. Well, again, thank you, Richard.
Great pleasure, Cardinal.